Imagine living in a world ravaged by disease, where fear and death are constant companions. This was the horrifying reality of life during the Black Death, the medieval plague pandemic that killed tens of millions. Today, we're diving into the terrifying world of the Black Death to uncover the grim existence of a plague doctor. The Black Death swept through cities and countrysides with devastating speed. No one, peasant or noble, felt safe. People who seemed healthy one day could be dead by morning. The psychological impact penetrated all levels of society. Terror and panic reigned. The dead and dying were often left in the streets, abandoned by even their friends and family, in fear. Many once thriving settlements became ghost towns as those who could flee did so, and everyday life ground to a halt. Amid this nightmare, the plague doctor emerged, a figure of both hope and dread. City authorities, desperate for help, hired special physicians to treat plague victims when no one else would. Even the Pope in Avignon brought in extra plague doctors to tend the sick. These doctors were tasked with treating everyone, rich or poor, often in exchange for a fixed salary. But their reputation was mixed. Some citizens saw the very presence of a plague doctor as a dire warning that death was near. Indeed, the appearance of a masked, cloaked doctor on a street often sent shivers down spines, a sign that the plague was in their midst. Regular physicians were overwhelmed, and many perished themselves or fled. For example, of 18 doctors in Venice at the start of the Black Death, only one was still on the job by 1348. 5 had died of plague, and 12 had gone missing or fled. In this climate of despair, the plague doctor stood as a last, macabre sentinel between the living and the dead. To confront the plague, doctors donned a distinctive array of protective gear, notably the iconic beaked mask filled with herbs like lavender and mint. They believed these aromas protected them from disease-causing evil vapors, or miasma, though this was rooted in flawed science. They also wore wide-brimmed leather hats, waxed coats or gowns, gloves and boots to cover every inch of skin. Carrying a wooden cane, they examined patients from a distance, using it to point out symptoms or maintain separation. Their appearance was intentionally imposing, lending authority and instilling fear. For many victims, the haunting bird-faced figure was the final sight before death. From dawn to dusk, the life of a plague doctor was a journey through misery. Each morning, the doctor would suit up in his protective costume, ensuring the beak mask was securely fastened and stuffed with fresh herbs. Steeling himself, he would venture into plague-stricken neighborhoods, often whole districts under quarantine. House by house, he made his rounds. At the door of a home marked with a red cross, a sign of infection, the plague doctor would knock or ring a bell to announce his arrival. Inside, he was greeted by scenes of horror. Patients writhing in pain with fever and blackened swellings, or corpses sprawled where they died. Holding his breath behind the mask, the doctor approached the victims. Using his wooden cane, he might point to a bubo on a patient's body, or to gently prod the patient's limb to test for signs of life. When treating the sick, the doctor applied whatever remedies he could. Perhaps he lanced a bubo with a quick incision to release the foul pus, then pressed a garlic poultice onto it. He might place leeches on the patient's skin to draw blood, or administer a draught of a herbal plague water to induce sweating. In some cases, the doctor simply offered comfort, giving the patient a few drops of theriac, a medieval herbal concoction, or saying prayers over them, knowing there was little else to be done. Throughout the day, the plague doctor was also an observer and a record keeper. He would note down the number of infected and dead in each household. One of his official duties was to maintain public plague records. If a patient died while he was present, he might certify the death and later report it to the town authorities. In certain cities, plague doctors were even asked to perform autopsies on plague victims, cutting open bodies, an unusual practice at the time, to examine the organs and understand how the disease killed. It was a grim task, but one that hinted at early attempts to investigate the illness scientifically. Plague doctors also often functioned as crude public notaries. They would collect last wills and testaments from the dying, or relay final messages. Since no priest or lawyer would come near, the plague doctor was the only witness available for a person's last wishes. They sometimes gave out advice to the healthy on how to avoid illness, such as burning tar or carrying flowers to ward off bad air, and warned townspeople to avoid contact with the sick. Each encounter was brief, done as quickly as possible before the doctor moved on to the next house on his list. The risks and challenges of this routine were enormous. With every patient visit, the plague doctor was exposing himself to the very contagion that was killing everyone else. The thick waxed cloak and mask provided some protection, but the doctor knew it was far from foolproof. Fleas, the true carriers of plague, though unknown at the time, could still jump and bite. A cough from a patient could send deadly droplets past the primitive mask. The longer a doctor worked, the more likely he would contract the infection himself. Many plague doctors paid the ultimate price for their service. Historical records tell us that plague doctors often did not survive long. To mitigate the risk of spreading the disease, a plague doctor usually lived in isolation away from healthy people. After finishing his rounds for the day, he could not simply go home to his family, if he even had one nearby. By agreement, he was required to quarantine himself for a lengthy period, often lodging in a segregated house or a makeshift hut provided by the town. This meant that plague doctors led a lonely existence even outside of work, eating and sleeping apart from others, constantly monitoring themselves for any hint of fever or the dreaded swellings. Being a plague doctor was not only physically perilous, it was psychologically harrowing. These men, and in rare cases women, were surrounded by death at all times. The sights, sounds, and smells of the plague were inescapable. Anguished cries of pain, the reek of decaying bodies and smoke of constant bonfires meant to purify the air, the eerily empty streets echoing with the refrain, "Bring out your dead." Day after day of this macabre reality took a heavy toll on even the hardier soul. Many plague doctors lived in a state of dread of catching the disease, and perhaps an even deeper dread born of witnessing human suffering on an unimaginable scale. They coped as best as they could. Some turned to religion, praying fervently for endurance or seeing their work as a sacred duty. Others likely became numb or detached as a survival mechanism, hiding behind the impassive mask. Personal writings from that era hint at their mental state. The French physician Guy de Chauliac, who served during the Black Death in Avignon, confessed that he persisted in his duties with constant fear for his own life. Yet he did not dare to flee because he felt it was his obligation to stay. This mixture of courage and terror was the plague doctor's daily companion. The plague doctor also faced social stigma and isolation beyond the quarantine of his contract. To the common people, these doctors were eerie figures, Their strange costume and role made them objects of suspicion. In some accounts, townsfolk would refuse to let a doctor lodge in their area, or would only leave supplies for him at a distance. The doctors were feared by the very communities they served. After all, seeing a beaked mask appear in one's doorway was a sign that the plague was at your doorstep. For the townsfolk, it was as if the Grim Reaper himself had come. Moreover, not all plague doctors were compassionate healers. Some were opportunists or charlatans, which further tarnished their image. There were whispers that certain plague doctors did nothing but count the dead and collect fees, or that they sold fake cures to desperate families. This led to mistrust. They occupied a strange social position, both needed and scorned. People were grateful someone was willing to tend to the sick, yet they also regarded the doctor with fear and sometimes resentment, especially if treatments failed or if the doctor charged extra money. The result was a lonely existence. Even after an epidemic passed, a plague doctor might find himself shunned. Few wanted to associate with someone who had been so close to the plague. In some cases, plague doctors had to move to new towns to find acceptance or work again. Despite all this, many plague doctors persevered. Whether out of duty, faith, the promise of a good salary, or a genuine desire to help, they continued to confront fear and death daily. If you enjoyed this exploration into the life of a plague doctor, be sure to check out our video about the life of a galley slave in the Age of Sail on your screen now. If you've made it this far, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us out. Thank you for watching, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one.